So I want you to picture a kitchen table in a small coastal town in Galicia.
Right. Or maybe like a quiet square in Asturias.
Exactly. You've got locals sitting there, sipping their coffee. And there's this very specific, very quiet question being whispered right now.
Yeah.
It's a question that's moving from those kitchen tables straight to local council meetings. And that question is like, are we watching the beginning of something we just cannot reverse?
Yeah. Are we becoming the next Mallorca?
Right, exactly. The next Mallorca.
It's a really profound fear. And honestly, it's a mathematically reasonable one. Because, when a beautiful, relatively unknown region suddenly gets, quote unquote, discovered by global capital, the transformation is, well, it's almost never gentle.
No, it's usually pretty brutal.
Right. It feels completely unprecedented to the people actually living through it. But if you zoom out and look at the macro data, it's actually this highly predictable, standardized process.
And that is exactly the core of what we're unpacking today. For this deep dive, our source is a really fascinating, heavily data-driven risk analysis by Svetlana Olenchuk.
Yeah, she's an independent real estate risk analyst.
Right. She specializes in cross-border acquisitions. Basically, she stress tests these emerging markets before massive, institutional or private capital gets fully committed.
Exactly. And our goal here is to strip away all the emotional rhetoric and just look at the actual mechanics of what foreign interest genuinely does to a local housing market.
Yeah. We're looking at this through two very distinct lenses today. We have the perspective of the foreign buyer who's, just looking for a better quality of life.
Right, which is totally understandable.
Completely. And then the perspective of the local resident who's just watching the fundamental economic structure of their hometown change almost overnight.
And we have to remember, both of those perspectives have entirely valid, totally rational drivers.
Yeah, they do. And, if you're listening from, say, Austin or Lisbon or Berlin, you are probably going to recognize these exact same symptoms playing out in your own neighborhoods right now.
Oh, absolutely. It's a global pattern.
So whether you're dreaming of buying a villa abroad, or you're fascinated by how global wealth moves around, or even just trying to understand gentrification in your own backyard, this deep dive is going to reveal the hidden, predictable stages of a real estate boom. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to understand if northwestern Spain is actually in trouble, we first have to understand the anatomy of how a region gets discovered in the first place.
Right.
Olenchuk's analysis really demonstrates that this is not just some random scattering of investment.
It's not an accident.
No, not at all. It's a highly targeted sequential life cycle. And it's driven by the exact same mechanisms every single time capital moves into a new territory.
So it's not like a sudden tidal waves across a whole province. It starts in a much more concentrated way.
Very concentrated, yeah. It happens in 3 distinct phases. So stage 1 is the discovery phase.
Okay, discovery.
Right. And this is exactly where parts of Galicia, Asturias, and Extremadura find themselves right now. The region has low prices, it has genuine, authentic character, and a very limited foreign footprint.
So it's mostly locals.
Mostly, yeah. The early buyers who arrive during this stage are usually deliberately seeking out a place that hasn't been homogenized yet. Word kind of spreads through, niche social media or personal networks.
Right, it's like finding a really cool indie band before they go mainstream.
Exactly.
But at this early stage, the market hasn't broken yet, right? The local economy can still absorb this influx without too much pain.
Yeah, that's fair to say. The fundamental architecture of the market is still totally intact. Transaction volumes are modest enough that locals and foreigners are basically operating within the same ecosystem.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right, so a local family and a foreign buyer might compete for the same property, but it's still at a price point that local wages can fundamentally support.
Got it. But then I assume the narrative escapes the niche. The secret gets out.
It always does.
Yes.
Which triggers stage 2, acceleration.
Acceleration, right.
The story of the region gets picked up by property supplements, international relocation guides, digital nomad forums, all of that. And this changes developer behavior.
Because they see the buzz.
Exactly. Developers start noticing the hype and begin acquiring land or, abandoned properties. And they specifically target the aesthetic desires of that incoming demographic.
So they're building for the expats, not the locals.
Right. And that's when prices begin to really detach from local wages. The upward trajectory is established. And at this point, the local buyer pool starts getting thinned out at the margins.
So if I'm a local making an average regional salary, I'm suddenly realizing that those mid-tier properties are they're permanently out of reach.
Yeah.
Which I'm guessing pushes us right into stage 3.
Yes. Stage 3, displacement.
Displacement, that sounds intense.
It is. In stage 3, foreign purchasing power becomes the absolute dominant force dictating all market conditions. Local buyers just can no longer compete across almost any price range.
Wow, anywhere.
Barely anywhere. Standard run-rate properties are rapidly converted into short-term holiday lets because, well, the yield is just exponentially higher.
Right, Airbnb and stuff.
Exactly. And the commercial landscape of the town centers totally shifts. Bakeries and hardware stores become boutique cafes and luxury real estate offices.
Oh, man.
Yeah, long-term residents are fundamentally priced out of their own geography. And this is the current reality in the Balearics, parts of coastal Andalusia, and significant stretches of the Costa Blanca.
Okay, let me just play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure, go for it.
Because on paper, an influx of foreign capital, fixing up decaying housing stock, injecting money into the local economy, reversing that rural depopulation that has plagued these regions for decades. I mean, that sounds like a massive net positive.
It does sound like it.
So why is Olenchuk framing this acceleration as like a critical warning? Isn't it a good thing for a region to get investment?
This raises an important question, and I want to point out, Olenchuk is very careful not to demonize investment here.
Right.
Foreign capital is not inherently destructive. It's not a bad thing by default. The systemic risk really emerges when a market transitions from being fundamentally sound, meaning, it's growing because of improved infrastructure, diversified local jobs, or genuine organic demand, to a market running purely on momentum.
Momentum, meaning the primary driver of a purchase is just the assumption that someone else is going to pay more for it tomorrow.
Exactly.
The underlying value is totally secondary to the trajectory.
Precisely. It becomes purely speculative. And the real value of Olenchuk's report is that she provides these 5 measurable data point signals, really, to track exactly when a market shifts from structural soundness to that dangerous momentum.
And these aren't just like the glossy metrics you see in a developer's brochure.
No, not at all. These are the structural fault lines.
Okay, so let's get into those. The first fault line she points to is affordability.
Yes.
And I know you, the listener, understand basic supply and demand, but Olenchuk frames this differently. She's not just looking at the sticker price of the homes, right? She's looking at the velocity of the divergence between local wages and housing costs.
That velocity is the key indicator. She actually cites 2026 data from the Banco de España, and honestly, the divergence is severe.
How bad is it?
Well, we're seeing house prices rising at double-digit rates, while rent inflation is running considerably lower. The immediate fallout is just this massive squeeze on the local working class. The data shows that the rent burden for low-income households has hit roughly 45% of their gross income.
45%.
Yeah, of their gross income.
That is insane. I mean, let's follow that mechanism through. If a local bartender or a nurse in Gijón is paying 45% of their gross income just to keep a roof over their head, they inevitably have to leave.
They've no choice.
They relocate inland, or maybe to a cheaper province, which means the local businesses literally can't staff their operations.
Exactly.
The cafes close, the local services degrade.
The neighborhood literally hollows out its own working class, which, ironically, destroys the very local charm and convenience that attracted the foreign buyers in the first place.
Right.
In established coastal markets, this hollowing out is already complete. In the Northwest, it's earlier in the cycle. But the direction of travel in specific municipalities is locked.
But, okay, let's look at this from the perspective of the wealthy buyer flying in from New York or London.
Okay.
If I'm bringing my own capital, I have a remote tech job, I'm not competing for local wages, why should I care if the local population is displaced?
Because it affects your investment.
Right. Like, I'm living my dream life in a renovated farmhouse. The local rent burden doesn't impact my spreadsheet, does it?
Absolutely impacts your spreadsheet. It impacts it the moment you decide to sell.
Yeah.
And that is the most critical risk Olenchuk identifies for the foreign buyer. It's called exit liquidity.
Exit liquidity. That concept completely changed how I look at real estate. Walk us through exit liquidity.
Sure. So exit liquidity is basically the mathematical probability that you can sell your asset within a reasonable time window, say 90 or 180 days, without taking a massive haircut on the price.
Okay.
During the discovery and acceleration phases, the market feels infinitely liquid. I mean, everyone is buying. Multiple offers are standard. It feels like a sure thing.
Right, like you could sell it tomorrow if you wanted to.
Exactly. But the true stress test of an asset isn't how easy it is to acquire. It's how resilient the buyer pool is when the market eventually cools down and that initial wave of investors decides to cash out.
I think of it kind of like replacing a diverse ancient forest with a monocrop of pine trees.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Like, sure, the pines grow incredibly fast. They look great on a chart for the first 5 years. But if a specific disease hits or, a specific economic downturn happens, the entire forest dies all at once.
Because it lacks the diversity of a natural ecosystem.
Exactly. So if you destroy the local Spanish purchasing pool by pricing them out for a decade, your eventual exit market is just incredibly fragile.
That is a perfect structural analogy. If there is no local demand floor, you are relying entirely on finding another wealthy foreigner who wants your exact type of property in your exact village at the exact moment you need to sell.
That's a lot of variables.
It's too many variables.
Yeah.
If macroeconomic conditions shift, say the US dollar weakens against the euro or remote work tax laws suddenly change, that hyper-specific buyer pool can evaporate literally overnight.
Wow.
Yeah. A market without locals is a market with no safety net. When that momentum slows down, the asset just sits on the market.
So if your exit liquidity relies entirely on who is coming in from abroad, we really have to look at who those buyers actually are. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, the demographic shift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The 2024 to 2025 shift in the data is just stunning. Capital is actively fleeing the established markets.
It is a profound redistribution of demand. Olenchuk pulls data from the General Council of Notaries, and the first half of 2025 tells a super dramatic story.
Right.
We saw foreign buyer activity surge in the Northwest.
Assess the numbers on that.
Asturias saw a 30.8% year-on-year rise.
Almost 31%.
Yeah, massive. Galicia was up 14.3%, Extremadura up 10.6%. Meanwhile, the Balearic Islands, which is, the ultimate established market, they recorded a 6.8% decline in foreign purchases.
A 6.8% decline in a market that relies entirely on foreign capital is like an earthquake.
It's huge.
That means stalled developer projects and inventory just sitting there. The heat map is absolutely moving north. But it's the nationality of the new buyers in the north that completely defies the stereotype.
Yeah, it's not what you'd think.
We aren't talking about British retirees looking for cheap golf courses anymore.
Not at all. The demographics are shifting so rapidly. Americans are now among the top 2 non-resident buyer nationalities in 6 Spanish regions.
What?
And they are heavily concentrated in Galicia and Asturias. Olenchuk identifies a really fascinating underlying driver here, which is the diaspora.
Right. So these aren't just like speculative hedge fund managers or crypto bros.
No. These are people whose grandparents or great-grandparents emigrated from these specific Galician and Asturian villages to the Americas back in the early 20th century.
They're basically returning.
Yes. They are returning with massive purchasing power, but they're driven by genuine emotional ties. Heritage, a desire to reconnect with their roots.
From an economic standpoint, diaspora demand is incredibly interesting.
It really is.
Because it's rooted in emotion rather than pure yield, so it tends to be stickier. They are way less likely to just panic sell during a minor market correction.
Exactly. It does provide a different kind of stability, yes. But, and this is but Olenchuk warns that it is still a highly concentrated, finite pool.
Right.
No matter how strong the emotional tie is, their purchasing power is entirely tethered to a single external economy.
The United States.
The U.S., exactly. If the U.S. experiences a severe recession, or if currency exchange rates flip unfavorably, that entire pipeline of buyers could freeze. It's still that monocrop forest you mentioned earlier.
Which brings us directly to the national supply pipeline. If developers see this influx of American dollars pouring into Asturias, their immediate instinct is to build specifically for that demographic, right?
Of course. That is the inevitable market response. But we have to overlay that with the Banco de España data from 2022 and 2023.
The housing shortage data.
Right. That data showed Spain facing a severe national housing shortage of roughly 325,000 homes.
That's a massive deficit.
It is. And that structural deficit is basically keeping a floor under prices nationally. But locally, on the ground, the question is, what exactly is it being built and who is it actually for?
Because developers aren't using their limited land and labor and materials to build like affordable mid-tier apartments for the local workforce.
Yep.
They're building luxury villas and high-end restorations to capture the American diaspora and the digital nomads.
Exactly. And this creates a severe overheating risk. The cycle is literally always the same. Prices rise rapidly, developers rush to file planning permissions, and construction begins.
But construction takes years.
It takes years. By the time this massive wave of new, high-end inventory actually hits the market, the original discovery phase buyers might already be looking to sell.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If all that stock hits simultaneously and the local demand has been entirely hollowed out like we talked about, the market softens violently.
So it's the classic difference between structural growth and momentum. Structural growth means you're building to satisfy a broad, diverse demographic. Momentum growth is just building luxury units on the blind assumption that infinite wealthy foreigners exist.
That's exactly it. But, that's the hard analytical side. Olenchuk's analysis makes a really critical pivot here. Because housing isn't just a tradable commodity.
Right, it's shelter.
It's shelter. It forms the physical infrastructure of a community.
And this is where we have to translate these percentages and data points into human reality, the social contract.
Yeah. Maintaining strict impartiality, as the report does. We have to recognize that the friction happening on the ground is not irrational.
No, not at all.
The fear that a quiet region could become fundamentally unlivable for its own people is backed by decades of data from places like the Canaries and Barcelona. When displacement outpaces a community's ability to adapt, it stops being an economic quirk and becomes a profound social crisis.
And we've already seen this escalate. I mean, the massive protests in the Balearics and the Canary Islands, thousands of locals marching against foreign ownership, demanding restrictions on short-term rentals.
Yeah, it's been intense.
From the outside, it's very easy to look at those protests and just dismiss them as simple xenophobia or, anti-tourist sentiment.
But Olenchuk argues that framing is far too simplistic. The hostility is a direct, completely logical response to systemic displacement. It is literally the sound of a local social contract breaking.
There is a historical irony in this report that genuinely stopped me in my tracks.
Oh, the emigration history.
Yes. If you look at the history of Galicia and Asturias, for generations, the people there had to emigrate. They left for Switzerland, Germany, Latin America.
Yeah.
They didn't leave because they wanted to experience a new culture or work remotely from a beach. They left for absolute economic survival. They were sending remittances back just to keep their families fed.
And now, a century later, the people arriving in those ancestral villages are moving with the exact opposite motivation.
Right.
These are wealthy individuals arriving purely for lifestyle optimization. Temperate climate, favorable cost of living arbitrage relative to New York or London.
It's a massive asymmetry of movement. One population moved out of deep economic desperation, and the incoming population moves out of luxury and choice.
Exactly.
So the local tension isn't just a dislike of foreigners, it's the visceral pain of being priced out of your own home by purchasing power that was generated in an entirely different global economy. You just can't compete with a Silicon Valley salary when you work at the local pharmacy.
No, you can't. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains exactly why the welcome for foreign buyers feels increasingly conditional.
Yeah.
And Olenchuk reaches a really fascinating conclusion regarding how to mitigate this. Because local governments are trying everything: zoning laws, capping short-term rental licenses, mandating affordable housing quotas.
Right.
Those policies matter, obviously, but she argues they are totally insufficient on their own.
Okay, I actually want to challenge her conclusion here, though.
Okay.
Olenchuk suggests the ultimate fix is the quote-unquote human solution, genuine integration. She argues foreign buyers must actively participate, learn the language, engage with local culture, buy from local hardware stores instead of importing everything.
Right.
But, is learning the local language really going to fix a systemic housing crisis? That feels like putting a cultural Band-Aid on a massive structural wound.
I get why you'd say that. It sounds soft compared to a hard zoning law.
Yeah.
But Olenchuk argues it is actually the core mechanism of long-term market stability. If foreign buyers import a parallel lifestyle, hiring foreign contractors, socializing only in expat bubbles, converting properties into empty investment vehicles, they extract value without contributing to the local economic velocity.
Okay, that makes sense.
Right. But if they integrate, their capital circulates within the local economy. They employ local tradespeople, support the year-round businesses, and build the political will to support balanced development.
Ah, I see.
In the long run, social cohesion is basically the only thing that prevents a market from collapsing under the weight of its own hostility. A region that successfully absorbs new arrivals maintains its value. a region that feels occupied by them becomes incredibly volatile.
Okay, when you put it like that, it makes perfect sense. So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Let's distill the actual takeaways from this data.
Yeah, let's break it down.
If you are that prospective buyer, scrolling through listings for a beautiful stone house in Asturias or a cliffside property in Galicia, you cannot just look at the view.
No, you have to ask the structural questions.
Exactly. What is actually in the supply pipeline behind your property? Is the demand in this town diversified, or is it entirely propped up by one demographic?
And critically, who are you realistically going to sell this to in 10 years?
Right. Are you buying into a structurally sound community, or are you just buying the peak momentum of a discovery phase?
And on the flip side, if you are a local resident or just an observer watching your own city transform, whether that's in Spain or Texas or Germany, you need to track these affordability ratios early.
Pay attention to what developers are actually getting permits to build right now.
Exactly. The time to advocate for smart zoning and protective policy is not when your town reaches stage 3. By the time displacement is obvious, the capital has already won.
Wow. Yeah. The window for action is during the discovery and early acceleration phases.
It's entirely about reading the underlying signals before they become historical facts.
It really is. But I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over on your own today.
Okay, let's hear it.
Olenchuk's data focuses on this sudden shift in global demand moving toward Spain's cooler northern regions. The heat map is visibly shifting north. But we have to ask, how much of this discovery phase is just standard real estate cycling, and how much of it is actually the very beginning of global climate migration?
Oh, wow. That is the variable that changes the entire scale of this conversation.
Exactly. As southern Europe gets hotter, as the traditional coastal havens of the Mediterranean face extreme heat and severe water shortages, will places like Asturias and Galicia become the permanent, non-negotiable new havens?
Yeah.
And if so, we aren't just talking about a temporary real estate boom driven by remote work. We are talking about a permanent, irreversible global shift in where human beings want or absolutely need to live.
How can any local community anywhere in the world prepare for that kind of unprecedented geographic pressure?
That is the defining question for the next decade of real estate.
It really is.
It's definitely something to think about the next time you hear someone at a dinner party talking about the next up-and-coming neighborhood. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Go out there and approach the world with a bit more curiosity today. We'll catch you next time.